Hello, my name is Noel Radford, and I run Radford's Pie Company in Hersham in Lancashire, and I live in Morecambe in Lancashire with my wife Sue. And we have 20 children, and there's nothing we love more than having children. And we'd have more children if we could, but we can't, unfortunately. And so we had to make do with 20. And we are the largest family in England. Nobody has a bigger family than us, and that means we are the genetic future. And what I wanted to talk about today was the kind of people who have massive families, the kind of people who are super breeders, the kind of people like us, the Radfords. And so that's pretty much the topic I want to discuss. So hello, and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. So yes, who breeds? Going on from my last video, which seemed to provoke a great deal of interest, in the week in between, or the 2 weeks in between, there was a very interesting article that was published by the BBC which averred that the population was going to die out. The population of the world was going to reach a peak round about sort of the end of the round about 2064 or something like that. And then the population was going to start to decline. And it argued that the population of China was going to halve by the end of the century. The population of Britain, the population of Spain, the population of all of Japan, the population of all of these countries was going to halve, and even the population of third world countries, as they fully industrialised and became highly developed, was going to start to go into decline. We were going to reach a peak population, I think, of something like 9 billion in the world, they estimated, and then the population was going to start to go down. And one of the great supporters of this channel, who is, of course, as you know, the younger son of a lord or the elder son of a knight, we're not sure which, got in touch with me and said he would be most interested if I would do a video in more detail on this subject of who breeds, because I don't agree with this. I don't agree with this idea that the population is going to reach some peak of 9 billion or something and then automatically going to collapse, because that assumes that who breeds is almost a random matter, and it isn't. There are certain kinds of people that seem to breed, and as I will discuss in this video today, those kinds of people basically have a genetic desire to have lots of children. They have hereditary fertility, and they have certain traits that go with this. And so these people are not going to stop breeding. These people are going to continue breeding, and these people are going to be the future. And so that's what I want to look at today. Who are the super breeders? Who are the kind of people that have lots and lots of children, and what is it about them that makes them do so? Well, there was a very interesting study that was published some years ago by my colleague Michael Woodley of Manee and his colleagues, called Slow and Steady Wins the Race, in which it argues that what he called, he argued that to a certain extent, it could be argued that what's called K strategy predicts breeding. K strategy. Now, what is K strategy? Well, for those of you who are new to the channel, we are all on a spectrum, a so-called life history speed spectrum, from R to K. And R ecology is a highly unstable, dangerous ecology where you live fast and die young. Consequently, there's no point investing in other people, there's no point investing in your offspring, so they could all just be wiped out. And so, because it's so unstable, and so consequently you are evolved to have as much sex as possible with as many fit people as possible, and just hope that some of your offspring survive. This is the R strategy. No investment, everything's about copulation. You invest in copulation. As the area in which you live, the ecology becomes more stable, but also more harsh. It reaches the carrying capacity for the organism, and so members of the organism start to compete with each other in an environment in which it is predictable. Then, therefore, there are benefits to having fewer children, to investing less energy in copulation and more energy in nurture. Because in that kind of ecology, if you invest all of your energy in copulation, then you might have lots and lots of offspring, but they'll all just die because they won't be adapted to the cold and they won't be able to cope. Whereas if you have fewer offspring and you invest more energy in them and in ensuring that they survive, then some of them are more likely to survive and you pass on your genes. Consequently, you divert energy away from copulation and towards nurture, towards bonding, towards bringing up your children, towards raising your children, that kind of thing. Those are the two extremes. Now, what was found in Woodley and his colleagues' paper was that in modern societies, it is K strategists, people who are motivated by nurture rather than by copulation, who tend to pass on their genes. Why is this the case? Well, in modern societies, we have contraception, and so consequently you can have lots and lots of sex, which if you're an R strategist, you are evolved to do, without the side effect of having children that you'll have to invest in, which is an R strategist you won't want to do. And also the nature of modern governments is such that they will track you down if you're an errant father. father, for example, and they will make you invest money in that offspring. They will force you to hand over money, and they will essentially make you do what you don't want to do, which is do nurture and do investment. So therefore, those people do not want to have children, and they are able to not have children. Consequently, the only people that are going to be left, the only people in that kind of ecology that are going to have children, are going to be those that really genuinely, they can avoid it through contraception, through abortion, whatever. Those people are going to be those that really genuinely want to have children, that want to nurture, that want babies, that like this. And so on that basis, you would expect K strategists to pass on their genes, and R strategists to gradually kind of die out in Western societies. And the paper argues that cautiously that's what's happening. It's not quite what's happening. It's not as black and white as that. And there are a number of reasons why it's not as black and white as that. So first of all, there's data from Todd Shackelford and his colleagues which find that in general women are more K strategists than males, because males are basically evolved to live fast and die young. If you want to, as a man, if you can get away with it, you can have sex with as many fit women as you want to, every single night, and just hope that your genes pass on. You've nothing to lose from the sexual encounter, and so it pays to basically be promiscuous, to just have lots and lots of sex with lots and lots of fit, young, good-looking, healthy women, and therefore hope that your genes will pass on. If you're a woman, you have got something to lose from the sexual encounter, of course. You can get pregnant, and you can be encumbered with a child and whatever, and so this is a serious thing. And so consequently, women are more picky. Women's lives are slower. Women are more K strategists. They are more interested in nurture. The baby is more likely to survive anyway if they're more interested in nurture, but also they're more picky. They want a man who will invest in them because they'll be more likely to survive, and the baby will be more likely to survive if the man invests in them. And so therefore women tend to be more K strategists, more prone to investing in nurture, and less sexually promiscuous, more prone to investing in nurture over sex. Yet, in many societies outside of the West, men literally want to have more children than do women. Secondly, there's various research which has looked at national differences in the extent of R and K, and what seems to be the case is that it's the societies that are the most highly K strategists that do not want to have many children and do not have many children, examples being Japan, and it's societies that are highly R strategists that want to have lots of children and do have lots of children, examples being parts of sub-Saharan Africa. So it's something more complex than just K strategy going on here. And equally, if you look at the paper by Woodley and his colleagues, there are all these measures of K strategy which are not associated with fertility. It's only on 2 measures of K strategy that you find an association with elevated fertility. One of them is religiousness, and the other one is having lots of family and social contact and support from your family. In other words, having a very close family. Religiousness correlates with a general K factor at 0.48, and the family social contact thing with a general K factor at 0.69. So what could be going on here? Why would this be? What actually is happening? Well, in terms of religiousness, we can see why that would be associated with wanting to have children and with nurture. We have to understand that we were under harsh Darwinian selection until as recently as 1800. The child mortality rate was as high as 50%. Roughly 90% of the population until about 1800 didn't have children, didn't pass on their genes, either because the children all died before the childhood diseases or whatever it was. Now, what were we selecting for in that context? Well, we know that first of all we were selecting for religiousness. Religiousness has all of the markers of something that's been genetically selected for. It's 0.4 heritable, at least if not more. It's associated with genetically associated with physical health. It's genetically associated with mental health. It's associated with being pro-social. It's associated with longevity. There are specific parts of the brain that light up, the anterior frontal cortex, for example, which is associated with it. It seems to be associated with markers of low mutational load and things like this. And so we were clearly, and it's associated, of course, most importantly with fertility, people that tend to have more children. And so therefore religiousness would have been selected for under Darwinian conditions. Equally, we were selecting, perhaps even independently of religiousness, for what's called general factor of personality. That is to say, under these Darwinian conditions of intense group selection where groups were fighting each other and whatever, the group that was more ethnocentric according to computer models, that like to say the group was more externally hostile but internally cooperative, according to computer models, is more likely to survive in the battle of group selection. What is internal cooperativeness about? It's basically about what's known as general factor of personality. Now, personality is normally divided into the so-called big 5 personality traits. Openness, that is openness to new experience. Conscientiousness, that is impulse control and rule following. Extroversion, that is that you feel positive feelings like joy and whatever strongly, and you therefore take risks to achieve them. Agreeableness, which is altruism and empathy. And neuroticism, which is basically being mental instability. So these are the big 5 personality traits. I hope I've got them all there. I often miss one out. But so these are the big 5 personality traits. Now, general factor of personality is that you're high on the positive pro-social dimensions, basically, of each of these. And we know that we were under genetic selection, essentially, for something like a pro-social personality, for these kinds of personality traits that are associated with being highly sociable and whatever. And so what you would expect, and indeed what has been found in general, is that things that you're under selection for tend to come together. They tend to come together. They ended up being selected for together as a kind of bundle. And so consequently, religiousness was being selected for, but so was mental health, and so was physical health. And so consequently, they end up being pleiotropically related. They end up being bundled together, being selected for in this kind of way. And so that was the situation that we were under. We were under this harsh Darwinian selection. Now, there's a degree to which, with the collapse of selection, remember, child mortality has gone from 50% in 1800 to 1% today. You would expect these things to start to break up. Excuse me. You would expect these things to start to break down. So religiousness would be being selected for, but it would no longer be being so strongly selected for, perhaps, and therefore it would no longer, and the other things were being selected for, but they would go off in different kind of directions, because the selection pressure is so much more weak, because our standard of living is so high, and we have medicine and inoculations and things like this, and so the selection pressure is much lower, and so there's room for things to sort of break apart. And this is what I think might have happened in terms of what's going on with these super breeders, and in terms of understanding who they are. So as I say, the first thing is religiousness. We would expect people who are religious to breed, because they would be, as it were, a remnant normal population in Darwinian terms, and consequently that being religious would tend to be associated, and is, with all other things which would be adaptive under Darwinian conditions to a certain extent, so at a genetic level, and so consequently you would expect religious people to be more fertile, and that's that, and they are, and I've looked at that elsewhere. But then there'd be other kinds of things that would be going on. And this is where I think we have to try to understand this family that I introduced to you at the beginning, this family that is Britain's most fertile family, that have loads and loads of children. So the studies that look at the personality, the correlates of breeding net of religion, it's not simply K strategy, it's aspects of K strategy, and it seems to be going on because they've looked at it using twin study data at the genetic level. Now, the first thing is extroversion. Extroversion predicts having children, having high fertility. Why does extroversion predict having high fertility? Well, if you're an extrovert, you feel positive feelings strongly, and therefore you will feel perhaps joy strongly, perhaps you will feel love strongly, perhaps you will bond very strongly because you are an extrovert, but certainly you will enjoy sex, and you will enjoy taking risks, and you will see the world in a generally positive way, and be kind of, in a sense, happy-go-lucky, a risk taker. And you can see how a family, if you watch any of these programs about this family that I mentioned earlier, the Radfords, if you will see that's what they're like. They're very positive people, they're very outgoing people, particularly the wife more so than the husband. They're very outgoing, extrovert kind of people, and so they're happy to just sort of take risks, and even though they're not particularly religious, the fact that they're high in extroversion makes them think that, well, the Lord or whatever they believe will survive. Everything's going to be okay. It's all going to be okay. It's all going to be fine. Don't worry. In fact, it's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. And you see, if you watch this program about the Radfords, just how positive they are about the future and about life and whatever. And there's such joyful people. So that's the first thing. We would, for that reason, we would expect extroversion, possibly even at the genetic level, to work in this way. Second, I'll look at that more in a minute. The second thing would seem to be low neuroticism. So if you are low in neuroticism, if you are mentally stable, then this seems to be associated with fertility as well. Why? Well, there's all kinds of pathways that might explain it. People who are highly neurotic are going to be angry and unpleasant, and they're going to worry, and they're going to be anxious, and they're going to be depressed. This could physically affect a woman. It could make her less likely to be able to get pregnant. It could mean that you'd be less likely as a man to want to be with that woman, and certainly as a woman you'd be less likely to want to be with a man like that. Divorce rate is predicted by neuroticism. Breakup is predicted by neuroticism. People that are neurotic are going to worry about the future. They're going to worry about money. They're going to hate, and they're not going to want to have children. If they do, they're not going to want to have very many. And so neuroticism could be, it seems to be another factor. The third factor that seems to predict having children is being high in agreeableness. Now, this is interesting. If you're high in agreeableness, then of course you're altruistic. You love other people. You bond with other people. You make strong social bonds with other people. You empathize with other people, so you're going to get on with other people. You're therefore more likely to get married. You're more likely to stay married. You're more likely to feel love, basically, to want things to love. And so, and I think that's what's true of the Radfords. They're these incredibly loving people. They want things to love. They want more things to love because they're just so full of love and so full of altruism and so full of empathy and care for others. And so this makes them, I think, potentially, you can see it that way round, kind of want to have children. But then there are some studies that have looked at this, so that was kind of what you would predict on, based on that. And the other thing that makes you want to have children is basically, although this doesn't necessarily come up in the data, or with some of the data it does, is low conscientiousness. That is to say, low impulse control. If you're low in conscientiousness, then you will end up getting pregnant by mistake. You won't use contraception properly. You'll take the risk. You won't plan. You won't take the pill properly, whatever. You'll get pregnant by accident. And one of the things that's the case with a number of these pregnancies of the Radford family is they've got pregnant by accident. And the final thing, and I don't want to insult them, and they're incredibly nice, loving people, and I wish them the best. But it's simply intelligence. I think we're dealing with a family there that at best have average sort of intelligence. And intelligence is weakly negatively associated with fertility at about minus 0.1 among European samples. We're not 100% sure why that is. There are all kinds of excellent theories as to why it is that intelligence is negatively associated with fertility. One possibility is simply that intelligent, nobody wants to have a large family. Everyone wants a small family, and so if you're low in intelligence, you're going to be a less efficient user of contraception. You're more likely to get pregnant by accident, that kind of thing. But then there's evidence that people who are highly intelligent, it predicts literally not wanting to have children, whereas people that are low in intelligence literally do want to have children. And so this might imply that it's something almost to do with instinct. It's hard to articulate, but that if you are highly intelligent, and then we all have these instincts, these built-in psychological biases towards things, and one of those things would be wanting to have children. It would be an instinct, and it would be an instinct that we'd be more able to get over, more able to argue our way out of rationally, perhaps, if we're more intelligent. It's not 100% clear why it is. Another mediating factor could be wealth. People that are better off tend to not want to have children. This is associated with intelligence. We're not 100% sure exactly what the mechanism is, but for some reason in advanced society, people that are highly intelligent don't want to have children. So that would be the other element as well, simply not particularly high intelligence. But then in terms of understanding the pathways through which these things are working, like we've got all these associations and we can speculate on why this is causing these people to have more children. The pathway through which it seems to work, according to a study called the Heritability of Fertility, is simply family timing. And again, this is based on twin studies, and it's based on twin studies that are saying that this is a genetic factor. There's some sort of genetic, highly heritable factor which makes you want to have lots of children. And the same factor that makes you want to do this is associated both with a certain kind of personality, in particular one that is high in agreeableness, and with the timing when you start having children. In other words, that you start young. So there seems to be some sort of genetic factor that predicts being high in agreeableness, that predicts being very easily able to get pregnant, and which predicts that you start having children when you're quite young, such that you end up having a massive family. So I will also just said extroversion is involved there. So it's fertility plus certain personality characteristics, particularly extroversion and agreeableness, which are themselves at least 0.3 heritable, if not 0.5, if not more heritable. And the fertility, which is itself heritable based on the twin studies, plus the timing at which you have you start, which is itself highly heritable. And so, what seems to me to one theory, one thing you can extrapolate from this, is that people that are very, very high in agreeableness bond very easily, and they create very strong, lifelong, deep, profound bonds, and they do so at a young age. And consequently, and they want, because they are this agreeable sort of K strategy sort of people, they want to have lots of children. And anyway, they inherit a desire to have lots of children and an ability to have lots of children. And so they bond very young, they marry, like this family, and they just have lots of children. And they love having lots of children. And then added to this, I would suggest, is that they are relatively low in neuroticism, they are relatively not particularly intelligent, and so all of these things come together to create these kinds of super breeders. And so, if you like, they take aspects of a K strategy, but also aspects that are associated with R strategy, such as not being particularly intelligent or whatever. Now, how could this happen? In Darwinian terms, where you could see how it would happen, it would be adaptive to have very high fertility. It would be adaptive to want to have a strong desire to have lots of children. It would be adaptive to be extremely high in agreeableness and extremely pro-social. It would be adaptive to be high in extroversion. It would be adaptive to be low in mental, to be high in mental stability and whatever. And so consequently, you can see how these things would sort of genetically come together. Now, what's happening now, of course, is that because of the selection pressures are so comparatively weak, you're going to get new things being thrown up, new directions of selection, and perhaps that's what's happened. So you've got these clearly adaptive things that are held over from pre-industrial times that have been divorced from religion, in the case of this family that don't seem to be particularly religious, and have come to, perhaps they're gradually coming together with something else, which is not particularly high intelligence or something like that. And so therefore they will gradually come together and start to be selected for as a thing, as a bundle. And perhaps that's what's going on. But what this would imply is that the future will, on the one hand, be religious people, be highly religious people. And our son of an esquire has also asked me to mention this American family who are extremely fertile, called the Dugas. I didn't find them as interesting, perhaps because I'm not American, but called the Dugas, who are very similar in some ways, but they're more middle class and they are specifically religious. So that would be one direction we would expect. We would expect people to become more religious and more kind of politically right-wing, and I looked at the data on that in my last video. But also, we would expect more of these people like the Radfords, that is to say, people who are not particularly bright, but who are just extremely nice, extremely kind, extremely outgoing sort of people. And there'd be all kinds of deviations on that theme. There'd be all kinds of deviations on that theme. If agreeableness itself, if generalized agreeableness, and this feeds into what I was saying last week, about 2 weeks ago, about political differences, if generalized agreeableness is being selected for in itself, then of course that's going to explain why people might be becoming more left-wing, because that's associated with generalized altruism, with being extremely high in care and whatever, and that would explain the sort of polarizing society where we're becoming more religious on the one hand, more right-wing, but then more agreeable on the other, because there are these different things which are predicting fertility. One of them is generalized agreeableness, one of them is being highly religious and highly ethnocentric and extremely right-wing. That predicts, because religion crosses over strongly with being right-wing, and we know the data indicates that people that are right-wing have higher fertility than people who are left-wing, and your political perspective is about 0.6 at least, or around there, heritable. And so therefore we're coming apart, we're being pulled apart in that way. It helps to explain why we're so polarized at the moment. But also, you would expect to have this group of people like the Radfords who are kind and loving and whatever. Because once society suppresses fertility, once society fills you with all these values that say you don't need to have children and you can be an individual and you can just be yourself and you enjoy your life and live for the now and be nihilistic and it doesn't matter and don't pass on your genes and antinatalism and whatever, then what's going to be left over are the people who are genetically very high in fertility and who are genetically very high in desiring to have children. That's what will be left over. And that's why I don't think the population is going to collapse, because that's what's going to be left over. These super breeders who are inured against the influence of these kinds of, or immunized against the influence of these kinds of antinatalist ideas. And on the one hand, that's going to be religious people, because of course under Darwinian conditions it would have been adaptive to be able to not listen to maladaptive ideas such as don't have children or whatever. And on the other hand, it's simply going to be people who are like this rather lovely family. So I hope this has been of interest, and if it has, then please feel free to remember I'm live on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 o'clock UK time, so do tune in then with my colleague. And also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can see ways to do so below, and you can support me in other places such as BitChute if you wish to. And I will see you soon, and goodbye. Oh, and think about breeding and all that.